Today, we're talking about something that is extremely important to me because I think it's amazingly relevant for our times that we live in, and that is fear. Fear. We exist in and around fear, and I'm sure fear has existed for a long time, but it's all I know is today, it's everywhere. It's everywhere, and oftentimes we are motivated by fear, and oftentimes we use fear to motivate others, right? So the idea is we're motivated out of fear, but God moves through love, okay? And so that's what we're talking about today. So when we talk about fear, I think a good example of it is World War II propaganda. You remember World War II propaganda, right? Like everyone knows what some of these are. Here's one of them right here. Like that's, God help me if this is a dud. His life is in your hands. It's a comforting message, right? Like that's motivating out of fear. It's trying to get you to buy war bonds or do your job. You know, all that. The next one is deliver us from evil. With a creepy girl in the middle of the swastika there, right? Buy war bonds. Using fear to motivate, right? Then you have this one. This is the enemy. Right through the Bible, right? I'm a bit of a cynical person, but as if we're the only ones with the Bible, right? Like that's like deliver us from evil. It's fear, right? And they're using fear in this old World War II propaganda to get you to buy war bonds so that you could finance the war effort. Where they were selling fear that if we don't get this done, then the Nazis will take over and we will all be speaking German. Now, some of you have heard, you're like, oh, it'd be great if the church services were in German. I don't think that's what you're talking about, though, right? I think some of you get excited. It's like, ooh, he's got a good German last name, Escher. I am so un-German. You need to understand this. Like, it is the highest percentage that I have in me, but it's like an 8, all right? Like, if you want to see what an American looks like right here. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, right? But fear, like it's the propaganda, and we still see it to this day. You look at stuff that comes out of North Korea, and it's all propaganda. It's sent to motivate out of fear, and these posters show that. And fear causes us to do all kinds of things. We can begin to fear a group of people because we're worried about what they're going to do with us. We view them as the enemy, and we can view a group of people, right? And we say, no, you're not allowed to be here. So we put them in a separate place, right? And you're like, no, you just stay over there. Because that's what we did with the Japanese internment camps, right? Like we were scared of them. And we operated and we lowered their humanity down, right? It's kind of a sad history for us in that. But this is all done out of fear. And the problem is fear, there's very little love in it. There's very little love. And we see that operating out of fear is not a good long-term solution. It's not effective in the long term. But fear is easier than love every time. So we usually go to it. Because we can get people to do what we want if we can just get them scared enough right away. In John's world, it was a very similar thing. So fear motivates now, right? Fear motivates now. In John's world, in the world of 1 John here, the Christians were experiencing fear. They were experiencing fear because there was another group of believers that were telling them, and were trying to motivate them out of fear. They were telling them, if you don't believe the way that we do, then they were going to be cast off. If you don't have this special knowledge or anything, then you weren't anything in the church. True Christians were terrified that they weren't living correctly enough and were being separated from God. Perhaps you've heard something like this before, right? You have to believe just like us or you're not going to go to the good place, right? Have you ever heard that before? Yeah, that sounds familiar. It tends to be our main form of evangelism in the church. And it's all fear motivated. Evangelism Explosion is a group that got really popular in the 70s, late 60s, 70s. And they popularized the evangelism method you probably all know. Like if you think of evangelism in the church, what's the first thing that you say to somebody? Come on. If you died tonight, right? Where would you go? Is there any fear in that? It's dripping in fear. It's dripping in fear. Now, I know some of you have probably said those words to people. That's fine. It's not about what you did in your past. It's what we do today. All right? That's fine. And some of you are like, oh, what's he talking about today? I thought this is how we did evangelism. We're talking about fear, and we don't motivate with fear because God doesn't motivate with fear. Because when we say that, we're saying, and there's lots of people that are in the church, and like this stuff isn't just black and white, good or bad. Like there's a gray conundrum to it. But we're saying that there's a lot of people in the church that came in because they were just scared of what might happen to them. They're just operating off of fear. You know, it's something that we see a lot is when there's a big change in culture, all of a sudden, like, fear will kind of ramp up around that change. Back in Rome, like in the year, man, I don't even remember the year, I didn't write it down, 312, Constantine became a Christian. Constantine became a Christian. And all of a sudden, this sense about the Christians were very turn and burn, literally, right? Because Constantine became a Christian, and he's like, oh, official religion of Rome now is Christian. It's like, everyone be Christians now. And so everyone's like, well, I don't really want to die at the stake. Okay, I'm fine, right? Kind of use that fear to motivate. 1,500 years later, another big shift happened. Do you guys remember what it is? Yeah, Lutherans. Remember what brought on the Lutheran Revolution? The printing press. The printing press. Suddenly, pretty reliable information we still use to this day. I'm using it for my sermon. Oh, I just turned it off. It's pretty reliable information to this day. We're still using it, was disseminated, and this kind of educational revolution started happening. And the church kind of started freaking out about it a little bit because of how information was getting disseminated. So one of the things they started doing was selling indulgences, which is basically the idea of selling fear, that you have to buy this in order to get to the next level, get up to heaven, right? Kind of had to buy this to get out. They're kind of selling this fear. And then kind of Luther came around and like, no, it's about grace and about Jesus, right? And we're at the cusp of another revolution right now. We're actually in the midst of it. We had the Industrial Revolution, which then brought on the Information Revolution, and we're freaking out again. We're like, oh my goodness. Like, what's going on? I don't know. So we're trying to come up with all these different ways to get people back into the church. And the church is losing standing in the community around us. And we're like, we need to get people back in. So we tell them things like, if you died tonight, do you know where you would go? So we just try to scare them into our walls. And if you came into the church off of one of those, that's fine. That's fine. Listen to the words of grace that come from the people inside of this church. Okay? Listen to the words of grace that pour out of the Bible. Listen to how God is taking away fear from you. But yeah, we oftentimes, we struggle with this idea of fear. You know, it's like, how are we doing enough? You know, if you don't believe like us, you're going to go to the bad place. I had a professor in college that always called hell the bad place. And it makes me laugh. So that's why I always say it. But if you don't believe like us, you're going to go to the no-no place. We'll say it like that. Right? Like that's we say stuff like that. We even say it like this, and we say it even in our hearts. And this is kind of the damaging thing. We allow fear to come into us. That we say inside the church, we're like, you have to live up to the standard, or you're not good enough. You're not Christian enough. And sometimes we can say, oh, we're not like that, until we meet someone that doesn't meet that standard. And then we're like, oh, door, right? And it's hard because you have to have some level of truth, right? It's difficult, and I realize that. But so often we treat it like fear. Have to treat it like fear. And even comes from the second coming, too. Is fear of, like Nicolas Cage and Kirk Cameron, if you understand those references at all. Fear of the last times, the end times, the second times. We look at Revelation and we're just like, oh no, those times are going to be terrible. We're about to read this. Actually, we'll go ahead and read part of it. Right underneath the highlight part, it says, there's no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. John wrote this. 1 John, see that? John. He also wrote, same author that wrote the Gospel of John, also is the same author who wrote Revelation. Okay? The same guy who wrote, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, wrote the scariest book in the Bible, right? Which should tell us something. That if we read Revelation and we walk away scared and worried and fearful, perhaps we've read it wrong. And we should maybe hit it again. Because the early Christians read Revelation and were comforted by it. Were brought comfort. Because here's what Revelation is about. Let's see, there's little ones today in the room, which is great. We love having you guys here. I know your life stinks right now, but I win in the end. That's what Revelation's about. I know your life stinks right now, but I win in the end. That's what Revelation is all about. This same guy who wrote, there's no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, wrote Revelation. He's saying us that God doesn't motivate with fear. But we motivate ourselves with fear all the time. The church will close if you don't give enough money. That may be a true fact sometime, but don't let anyone motivate you out of fear like that. We give because Jesus has already given us so much. And if the individual church needs to close down, then it needs to close down. But the church already died and rose again. It's Christ's body. The church is alive and well. And it will be for all time. That's evangelism. When you go to someone, you go, the church is alive and it's bringing you life. So let's go feed the homeless, right? Let's bring life to the homeless. Let's go clean the streets, right, Judy and Fred? Because we're bringing God's beauty into the world. That's evangelism. It's saying that the body of Christ is alive, and we're part of that. Let's bring life to everything around us. But that's not how we see it usually. It's for some of you that moms or dads in the room that are newer moms or dads. All the mommy blogs, right? You part of any of these? Those are places of ungiving life, correct? Yeah, right? It's just, for those of you who don't know what mommy blogs are, it's places that you can ask a question. It's like, so my kid's having this little problem here, and probably the first response down, it's like, are you giving him gluten? That's the problem, right? It's always something negative, right? It's are you doing this? That's the problem. And it's like, no, I'm just asking for help. I'm not looking for judgment, right? Because we're not living up to their standard of their perfection of mommy stuff. But I think we feel that in all the time. And we see this, and this is the big one, and you guys know I've been going there because I always talk about this stuff. But we see it in our politics. My goodness. Now, I'm not talking just about the presidential candidates right now, but which candidates, local office, senators, Congress, all of them, presidents, which candidates ran campaigns of fear? All right? All right. Which ones ran a campaign? Why did they run a campaign of fear? Because they'll get your vote, right? Now, what has happened after Trump got elected? More fear, right? More fear. Like, it stares at us in the face, and we should know better. But we oftentimes fall into it, and I hear people like just spouting off the fear lines from other people, from candidates that they like. And listen, I fall into it too. I'll look at the news and I'll be like, what? Right? And then I have to always back up and like, no. Because the evil one uses fear. The evil one uses fear. And I'm not going to be part of that. Like, I'm not going to be a part of that. Like, it's hard. It is. I fall to it too. I get started talking with my friends, and it's just like, talking about it, and it's like, I'm worried about this, worried about that, like all that stuff. And I fall into it, and I have to go, no. Because we got to look at the scripture here. And it says, by this is love perfected with us, so that we may have confidence for the day of judgment. So we don't have to go before Jesus scared, because he is so also are we in this world. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment. And whoever fears has not been perfected in love, and we love because he first loved us. You see what he's doing? He's saying that people of love, they don't fear. And they don't make other people fear. Because that's what we see in Jesus, is that he took all of their fear away. They took all of their unlovingness, all of our unlovingness and fear, and he took it to the cross with him. He took it and it didn't matter. He just grabbed him and he said, you are mine. It didn't matter who you were, how much you were afraid, how much you were trying to motivate others by fear. He grabbed you. And that's always been his story, is that Jesus came into the muck and the mire of us all. And it's right here with us. So, we don't fear. We show love. And part of that showing love is loving our brothers and sisters. Loving all. Because that is how we express who God is in the creation. So we don't show fear in love. So what have we learned? Like, fear motivates now, right? But God moves in love. God is redeeming the world by his death and resurrection of his Son. He's redeeming you, and he's saved you, and he showed you this amazing love, and he motivates in love. And the beautiful thing about motivating in love, it's harder, it takes more effort, but it lasts. It lasts. Fear is temporary. You always have to be drumming up a new story to get people to do things. But motivating in love lasts. And I have proof. I have proof. Can you believe it? I have proof. So that those World War II propaganda posters, where do you find those if you were to look for them today? Maybe a World War II museum somewhere, showing like the state of the culture of the day. Do you find them in art galleries? Do you find them hanging up in people's homes? Maybe, if they're weird, right? like that's. Do you find them in people's homes? Do you find them in all these other places? Like, no. They're just museum pieces showing the fear of our culture. And we kind of look at them and go, at least I think we should. And we should look at them and go, not the most positive times, right? It's like, ooh. But during that same period, In 1941, FDR, in his State of the Union address, talked about the 4 freedoms. Does anyone remember what the 4 freedoms are? You've seen the artwork from him, because he commissioned an artist by the name of Norman Rockwell to do these 4 freedoms. This beautiful, bringing beauty and love into the world rather than judgment and hate and fear. And they still are circulating around art shows to this day. The first one is the freedom of speech. Yeah, you recognize that one, don't you? Have you ever seen that one before? The beautiful thing about this one is, notice how he's standing up and everyone's listening to him. Freedom of speech. The next one was the freedom of worship. 1941, it's not all Christians represented there. The freedom of worship. It's a beautiful picture. The freedom from want. You guys all know what that one is, right? Freedom from want and the freedom from fear. The 4 freedoms. And these 4 freedoms, the original copies are about 4 feet tall, something like that. And they travel around together to all these different art museums all over the country, because they bring beauty and grace in a fearful time. He could have just brought more fear, but instead he brought hope and love. And that hope and love is still around. We see that one all the time. I used it in the Christmas sermon series, if you remember. But there's all 4 of them. And they go around and they bring beauty all around. So there's 2 things I want you to get from this sermon. 2 things. One is, don't motivate anyone out of fear. It's low, okay? And it's not Christian. That's a fearful phrase. It's not how Christians act. I don't know how to make it not fearful, but it's not. Because perfect love casts out fear. Let's not fear. Let's not motivate with fear, because that's not who we are. Because we're Christians, like what John says. And Jesus dwells in you, and His love is made perfect in your weakness. So bring that love, be His hands and feet to those around you. And the second thing is don't be motivated by fear. Listen, if I ever motivate you out of fear, call me out on it. If any other Christian leader motivates you out of fear, go, no, right? I'm saying that even about myself. Because it's easy, and I can get frustrated, and I can start motivating out of fear. I used to sell cars. I know how to sell. I sold used cars. All right? I know how to sell. And I don't want to motivate out of fear. Because that's usually what selling is. Right? You've seen all those ads on TV. The people who don't know how to pick up a pot right. So buy the nice pot that's got green lining in it, right? Like we all seen those ads. Don't let anyone motivate out of fear, especially if they're a Christian overseer. But if it's anyone that's trying to, just resist, because Christians, they don't create fear. Jesus' love has cast out fear. He's made you perfect, so trust these words from Him. Isn't that beautiful? So Christians, let our love that comes straight from Jesus and what He's done for us, let it create beauty in this world. Let's bring hope and grace into this world, not fear and scarcity, because we've been given everything by God. So let's do that as we go out, and we can bring that idea to the masses around us. And I think that's what we call evangelism. And we're bringing hope and grace to the people. Amen.